This is Conversations with Crystal, brought to you by Gateway Perspectives on Westchester Talk Radio, produced by Shark Creative. I am Crystal Hawkins-Siska, your host, current president of the Hudson Gateway Association of Realtors, Bronx native, and current resident of Briarcliff Manor. The goal of this program is to provide great information and awareness about the real estate industry to our members and community. This episode, we will be interviewing Richard Haggerty, and we'll have a nice little dialogue going back and forth. Richard Haggerty is the Chief Executive Officer of Hudson Gateway Association of Realtors. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So Richard, how long have you actually been a part of the association here?
Oh, Crystal, you're putting me right on the spot. I hate to admit how many years. I think we're going on 37 years. I was hired in 1984.
1984. I just want to let you know, I remember you way back in the day when I started back in the 90s. I mean, back in, early 2000s, actually. And you guys were on Post Road in that little space there a long time ago. You've been with the association a long time. Can you just talk a little bit about the trajectory, like how you started with the association and came to be the CEO today?
Sure. It's an interesting tale because I actually started at the association as a temp. I was looking for a job in publishing in New York City. I had gone to the University of New Hampshire and I was an English major. And I thought, well, let me go down to the big city and get into publishing. And they kept on trying to push me into selling textbooks, which is not a job I was looking forward to. So I actually attempted a couple of locations, including up by you at the William Watson Center, the IBM William Watson Center. I worked there for about 6 months, but then I went to work for the then Westchester County Board of Realtors in 1984, this summer. And after a couple of weeks, they offered me a job as Director of Member Services. And I never looked back. I stayed in that position for a number of years. Then Gil Mercurio, my predecessor, hired me to the position of Deputy Executive Officer. Then in 2011, they hired me to become the CEO of the Hudson Gateway Association effective January 1st, 2012.
So there is something to be said about taking a summer job, right? About where that could lead you.
Tell me about it.
So now with your multiple decades with the association, when you look back 10 years ago and where our association was then, are we now where you foresaw we would be? If not, why not? If so, if yes, why? Why yes?
Yeah, we certainly have grown over my 37 years, and a lot of that growth actually has happened in the last 10 years. In 2011, we were approached by representatives of the Rockland County Board of Realtors to see if we would be interested in talking about a potential merger. And we talked about it, and we thought, well, if we're going to have that conversation, perhaps we should also involve the Orange County Association. And those conversations moved very, very quickly in 2011. And they came to a fruition before the end of the year, where we were all on board to launch a brand new association called the Hudson Gateway Association that encompassed the 3 boards. And I didn't envision that happening as quickly. I didn't envision starting my career as CEO of a brand new organization that encompassed that much territory, the 4 counties, Westchester, Putnam, Rockland, and Orange. So the growth trajectory started right off the bat. But then it continued with a merger with the Manhattan Association of Realtors, and most recently last year with the Bronx Manhattan North Association. So I really did not anticipate that kind of growth. And certainly when I became CEO, I did not anticipate launching a new regional MLS with the Long Island Board of Realtors. But I think I quickly realized when I became CEO that you can't stay in place, that it's all about growth that benefits the members. It can't just be about growth. It's got to be about growth that benefits our realtor members. And I think that we've really done a good job with leadership like you to make that growth happen. And it's happened much more quickly than I anticipated.
With all of this growth, one of the things that we truly didn't anticipate is a pandemic hitting us in the midst of our working year back in 2020. So I wanted to ask you, based upon what we've been going through for the last year and a half, what are some of the things that you feel the most proud over in terms of what our association has been able to accomplish during this difficult time?
You know, there is a lot, quite frankly, and it was really a dark time, and you were there for that as president-elect last year. And at the beginning of March of last year, we thought everything was just going to be great. It was, 2020 was going to be a great year. The market had started off strong in the first quarter, and within a matter of weeks, that all changed. I'm most proud, quite frankly, of our team here at HGAR. We have a staff of committed professionals, and they were really able to pivot on a dime. Within the span of a week, we had a plan in place to take our entire operation remote, and we had our phone system set up that it was going to all be remote, that everybody be able to work from home. And it really, were there some bumps on the road? Sure. But for the most part, it happened seamlessly. But I'm really proud, first, of our team here, of really dedicated staff, but also I'm extraordinarily proud of the leadership. And you were part of that leadership team last year. Because we had to really be reassuring in what were really scary times. And I think that the leadership team, led by Gail Fatizzi as president and you as president-elect, did an amazing job in that task, because we were in uncharted waters. None of us had gone through a pandemic before that literally shut down the real estate world, that shut down our entire world in New York. So I really am very proud of that. And I'm also very proud of the fact that we continued to grow. We just didn't sit in the sidelines and wait this thing out. We had the merger with the Bronx Manhattan North Association. We launched, with Gail's leadership and your leadership, we launched the DEI initiatives. And I'm going to kind of throw you a curveball a little bit and ask you a couple questions, because I know that's one of your passions. But I really do think that in the middle of that pandemic, the leadership team did exactly what they were supposed to do, which is to lead, and to lead in difficult times. And I'm very proud, again, of our staff, who also really chipped in and were just amazing throughout that entire process.
I use this expression, and it's not original at all. I borrowed it, and I don't even know where I got it from, but it is: the pace of the leader is the pace of the pack. And I do have to say that I was deeply impressed with you and Gail. So it was easy to follow and be a part of a team that really had clear, level heads on how to face this challenge and pivot properly, because we were thrown a lot of different curveballs. It wasn't a smooth road at all. And I think that recovery of being able to act decisively as things change was one of the biggest things that helped us to move forward in a way I think was positive, not only for our association, but also for our industry, as we kept in touch with leadership around the state in regards to our industry here.
So let me ask you a question, though, because you were the first president to actually have a virtual installation. You had a lot of firsts, but you made it very clear at your installation, we actually created a background for your theme, that you were really going to emphasize the importance of the American promise. And I'd like to hear you talk a little bit about that vision of the American promise, because you really drew a distinction between the American promise and the American dream. And I think it's important to hear you talk about that. And I want to hear your vision about how the association can continue to move that forward.
Yes, you're turning the tables on me, and that's okay. So I have to say, I am proud to be an American. It's one of the things that in my own prayers that I actually feel that I'm blessed to be in this nation as opposed to many others. Even though it's been a sordid history, especially for a person like myself, who is African-American descendant of slaves here. The American dream, as I understand it, and that was an expression that was coined, I think, back in the 1920s, or a book that was written. And it's the belief system that any person, regardless of what status they were born into or what class, through hard work and determination, can achieve any level of success that they so desire, especially without any impediments from their community or from their government. We believe in this so much so, it is, to be an American is a little bit more than just a nationality, it's an ideology. But to call it a dream really gives us an out to not fully live it. You know, when you're dreaming, you're asleep, you're unconscious. When you're dreaming, it's a hope without a strategic plan. Dreams may or may not come true. And this is too instrumental to who we are as a people to leave it or to relegate it to something so intangible. I mean, it sounds beautiful, but what's more concrete is when you can rest your assurances on a promise, giving your word and actually having laws and statutes that would support it. So that's why I think we need to call it more of an American promise. And a part of that American promise, or the realization of it in terms of achieving our success, whatever that may be for any individual, one of those things that are wrapped into it is truly to home ownership, the ability to own property, the ability to have wealth and have ease of access to that. Excuse me. So that's my thought with the American promise. And we have to make sure, and it's a level of accountability as citizens to make sure that everything that is in the fabric of our institutions and our laws, our businesses would support that without impediment. Now, I'm not saying that there's no challenges, that it should be easy street. No, we live in a capitalist nation, and that means this competition is a good thing. Some people will be winners, some people will be losers, but there shouldn't be anything that is embedded in our systems that would hinder a person from achieving that success, especially based upon things that they cannot change, like the color of their skin or their gender or their, or if they have a disability or are different abled, all of these things, we have them as protected classes because we do see that in other nations, you're kind of pigeonholed into a group and literally almost can't get out of that at all, no matter what you do. And that's what makes us different than everybody else. So that's what I really wanted to bring to the fore for our association, to take it seriously, because as realtors, we are part of one of the most noble professions that help advance those ideals, because we are able to build wealth through real estate, and owning land is really embedded into our rights. So I hope that answers your question.
It does. And it's interesting because right before the pandemic, and I believe it was the fall of 2019, there was the big Newsday expose about discriminatory practices in the real estate profession on Long Island. And I think everybody who saw that very well-documented expose that included video, that included audio, were really, truly mortified and extremely disappointed in our profession. I think we also recognize that we shouldn't just think that happen on Long Island, that it could happen everywhere. But I think the conversation became much bigger than that in 2020. And we started having the conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And Gail launched a task force, and you chaired that task force. And I think that conversation broadened to recognize that it wasn't just about how do we conduct training for our members so that they don't engage in discriminatory behavior. It's recognizing that individuals, especially people of color, had barriers put up over decades upon decades by institutions, including governmental institutions, that kept them from being able to purchase real estate. And as you just pointed out, that's one of the biggest building blocks of wealth in this country. And I think that one of the most eye-opening books that I know that you've read is Richard Rothstein's The Color of Law. And we actually, really at your recommendation, as well as the Fair Housing Committee, had him speak at our Fair Housing event earlier this year. Can you talk to me a little bit about your thoughts on DEI and the direction that you took the task force? And I know that we now have just launched the DEI, the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Standing Committee. So talk to me about that initiative and why you think it's so important.
Well, I think one thing I want to start by saying is that this is not a political move. I think that it's important to distinguish real investment in community and country versus an opportunistic soundbite for the moment. So that's not what this is about. This is not about stamping our feet to get attention. It's actually making the conscious choice to invest and engage in behaviors and activities that can influence our community, our industry, and our country in a way that's necessary to help all citizens. So I think it's important to say that and make that distinction, because we are hearing a lot about diversity, equity, inclusion, and it just, for many, they may start to feel allergic to even hearing those words because they think it's just a fad or it's just a popular statement for the moment that's going to actually just die out. But no, this is a real movement that we are seeing across our country because it's necessary. So it took us a little bit to get here. And I think that it's important to say that there was healthy debate in actually getting us to embrace diversity, equity, inclusion, to have a leader like an officer. We have Fredimir Garcia, who joined us. He was on our first episode. And also a task force, by extension, the creation of a committee, because everybody needs to feel as though they belong at the table and that there's a seat for them to fill at that table, not just a bystander. And I also, in terms of equity, not necessarily everyone having the same, but the opportunity for the same and a leveling, which is going to be a more extensive conversation, as well as diversity. Not only just diversity in thought, but definitely diversity in the actual people who are sitting in the table based upon multiple factors. Because one of the things that we do learn, or anyone who's doing this work, and it's important for our agents and people in our industry and even in the community know, is that our brains just work a certain way. When we literally look across the table at somebody who looks like us, there's this assumption that we just think the same way. It's physiological to a certain degree. It's called the schema in the brain, but literally, if the person looks different from you, it automatically actually pushes your idea, because you automatically assume or you automatically believe that they don't believe the same as you, which in and of itself pushes for greater and richer conversations. It's just a part of our evolution as individuals, as beings, and that we have to kind of embrace that. And so this is really important because, as you stated, based upon what happened in Long Island, and I don't want to beat up on Long Island because I know it felt like with a lot of agents that come out there, they're always beating up on us. And it's like, we just want to deal with the nation of this is what happened in this geographic location, but it's indicative of an issue that is happening nationally. And I think that's what we have to realize, that our behaviors or some embedded ideas that we may or may not be conscious of is limiting the ability of groups of Americans to achieve the success that they so desire. And that's why it comes back to that American promise, because if we have these ideas that come from our citizens and it starts to embed or it's starting to be expressed in laws or behaviors of organizations, we cannot infringe upon the rights of other Americans by those. So it is incumbent upon us to actually expose this, because to do anything otherwise is un-American. That's my opinion, and I'm sticking with it. So, and I was so glad with Richard Rothstein, because we do have these conversations about systemic racism. And that's another thing that has become like a catchphrase and is high debate. And I feel, it is my experience, because I lived it, systemic racism exists in the same way that air and oxygen exists. It's here. You may not see it, but you can and do experience the effects, right? Because truly, if oxygen was taken out immediately from the air, who could breathe? And so there's many of us who are having an experience where we can't breathe. And that's not to even be a catchphrase for anything, any events that's happened in our country. It's just really actually an experience. And Richard Rothstein's book, which I think is something that's incumbent for all of us as citizens to read, is that this is not made up history, it's just forgotten history. And that's what our responsibility is, to remind ourselves, because those of us, right, it's the age-old expression, if we do not learn from history, we are bound to repeat it. So as being, like I said, an African-American descendant of slaves and having family in here for hundreds of years, I myself have a family that experienced that systemic racism by actual federal laws that inhibited my family from achieving wealth at a certain rate as opposed to our white counterparts. My grandparents were in World War II. They did not get to participate in the benefits of the GI Bill as their white counterparts. I mean, they literally, my grandfather came back to Larchmont and couldn't stay there, right? Couldn't really, had to go somewhere. It brought him back, it brought him to Harlem. Mm-hmm. And this is not hypothetical. It happened. It's real. It's really happened. And you could literally put two families. I mean, I even look at, I'm in a relationship with someone who is white, and I could actually literally take our families and where they were in the scheme of history and time. And you could literally see what my family was and was not able to do in comparison to his. And it has nothing to do with hard work. Has nothing to do with that.
Yeah. You made 2 points that I think really resonate with me. First off, this should not be about politics. Mm-mm. And also the fact that we have to continue to be willing to have conversations, and conversations that sometimes can be difficult. And what I find frustrating is, we fall back on the phrases of the day. And certainly the two phrases we hear way too much about is being woke or wokeism and cancel culture. And people use those two phrases like grenades. They just keep on lobbing them, and primarily through social media. And instead of having the conversations, meaningful conversations, they create these labels and just make accusations that they go back and forth with other people. And we have to get beyond that from my perspective. So I'm glad you made both those points.
I think one of the things that can help us move forward as a nation is if we can truly embrace that we're family, if we could really embedded into our DNA that we are one big family of Americans who believe in an ideology, and we have chosen, like, we're the greatest experiment to show that people from different backgrounds with a belief system of progression can all formulate under one umbrella and make a united nation together. I think if we really, really let that resonate in our hearts, I think that'll help us move out of these labels that are going on, because it's just about a family, like any family that may have some dark pieces in their past, that if we could sit at the table and have difficult conversations, we can move ourselves forward into being the better versions of ourselves. Because we know any family, like, to get it to work, we got to talk about the hard stuff. Yeah. And figure out a plan and to grow past it. And that's all that's necessary here. So we need to stop being so intimidated, frightened, angry by the conversation, and just understand that this is an opportunity to be better, or who we purport ourselves to be in the world. And I think if we can get along with that, it'll catapult us to the next step. All right, Richard. So it's been at least 20 minutes, and you and I could go on talking forever. So maybe what we can do is put a pause here, as this will be part 1 of our conversation, and we will put a bookmark and have part 2 of our conversation. What do you think about that?
Sounds great.
All right. So this was part 1 of Conversations with Crystal with Richard Hagerty.